Asgarnia, or better known as the God Wars Dungeon region. Unlike Misthalin and Karamja in our last video, this is the first time that you actually get to choose a region to unlock. The reason why I wanted to cover Asgarnia next is because the region priority is very, very different than what we covered last time. And this is how you should, in general, be thinking about your regions going forward. You want to look at the elite and master tasks of a region, and you want to see if the tasks that those are things that you enjoy doing. In this case, with Asgarnia, almost every single elite and master task is going to be focused around the God Wars Dungeon, which means if you like God Wars Dungeon and you just want to go in and kill Bandos or Nex or Kree over and over and over again and get 500 kills, potentially go dry on the drops even though you have a drop rate multiplier, right? And you're okay doing that and you enjoy that, then you definitely want to pick this region, because that is the main content that you are going to be doing in this over the duration of these 8-week-long league. This is the God Wars Dungeon region. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. If you ignore those, you are missing out on thousands of points towards unlocking your relics, your regions, or even placing in your cups for Dragon or Rune Cup. Now, the other thing you want to think about is the gear and the PvM. And assuming that we get very similar relics in terms of combat relics that we did in the last Trailblazer League, you are going to want to go all in on a single combat style. So looking at these regions, looking at Asgarnia as a whole, and saying, what bosses can I fight? What gear do those bosses give me? Is this stuff I want to do? And does this fit with the combat style that I want to go all in on? Having some gear outside of that combat style is nice for some content. Some raids and stuff means you have to have a mage gear and some range gear, even if you're the melee, right? But those are secondary. You really want to all in on that gear and that combat style type as much as you possibly can. With that, let's look at the bosses. So obviously, we have the God Wars Dungeon bosses. We have Bandos and Kree, Zami and Commander Ziliana. But we also have Nex, which is a new addition to Trailblazer League, as it wasn't out the last time Trailblazer League came around. When you leave after you go, that kill count actually stays. So you only have to get the 30 kills or whatever it is one time per boss, and you never have to go back and do that over and over and over again. Secondly, because everybody's an Iron Man, and these get very, very clustered, they decided that every time you go in, it is always in an instance. You never have to worry about being crashed, and you'll never accidentally crash somebody else, which is really, really nice. And then thirdly, they have announced that we are getting Last Recall, which is a relic in the past that they probably are going to give to us passively, would be my guess, towards the end of the relic tiers. But what Last Recall does is it puts an item in your inventory that when you teleport away, you can click it again, and it'll bring you directly back to where you teleported from, which means you can go in, get your kill count, kill Bandos, use all your food, supplies, prayer, etc., and then walk out of the instance, teleport to Edgeville with your glory, hit the bank, click your Last Recall button, and boom, you're immediately back to Bandos. No more teleporting to Trollheim, no more running through the ice and lowering all your stats. You are just directly back to Bandos. This leads to some really cool interactions with spec weapons as well, is that once you put a revitalization pool in your house, you can actually home tele, recharge your prayer, and your special attack energy come in and instantly come in with full spec every single kill, which speeds up these kills a lot, as well as makes it to where you don't have to do the tedious work that can sometimes be God Wars Dungeon. Lastly, I want to talk about Nex. So Nex is interesting because there's going to be kind of 3 different phases of Nex in leagues. The first is going to be in the first couple of days as people are starting to get gear, people start getting their things that they need to kill Nex. You're going to notice some small teams popping up, where there's going to be a couple of small handful of people with their combat relics that are able to do Nex with low stats and bad gear because the combat relics are just busted. And that is going to be like the peak time if you can get in on those and get ahead of the game and get into Nex early with these like 5-6 person groups, to really get uniques, because the drop multipliers will make it more common, and you're not sharing the loot between a mass world. Give it a week or two in, you're going to start noticing that there's a lot more people who have finally geared up and are ready to face next, potentially even for the first time, and those worlds are going to start getting crowded. Luckily, because we have Asgarnia, you do have access to combat achievements, which means you theoretically could unlock enough combat achievements to unlock private instances and invite your friends to them. But for the most part, you're going to notice there's going to be a lot of masses going on, and unless you have something like a Zerite crossbow that you got early, it's going to be really hard to MVP those and really get uniques from next. So note that this is one of those bosses you want to do as early as you possibly can and try to beat the rush. Kind of lastly with Nex is eventually people are going to start getting their loot, and towards the end of League, people are just going to stop playing League, and Nex is going to calm down again and go back to being more small consolidated teams, I think. Which is overall is a good thing. I think having more small team Nex is better than having masses, but masses can definitely be fun. And if you're just wanting to learn the mechanics, you've never killed Nex before, going in during a mass is a great way to at least see the mechanics, see how much damage you're taking, see how to live and survive, right? Before then moving on at the later portions of the league to round out your gear, to finish your Torva, to finish your Zerite crossbow, right? You do have two other bosses in this region. You have Mole and Serb, and these two bosses will round out the last of your elite and master tasks, most likely. Mole kind of serves two parts. One is he'll probably have some like big KC task. I think in the last Trailblazer League there was like a 700 kills Mole task, but Mole gives you a lot of bird nests and seeds, as well as not just herb seeds but also tree seeds, which are really, really good for farming, because at this point you have a whole bunch of tree patches all over Mistalin, Krumja, and at this point Asgarnia, but you don't really have a good way of getting tree seeds, but Mole really does supply those, which is great, and supplies you with so much herb XP as well, which is great. And then the thing with Cerberus is, because you're in God Wars Dungeon, you have access to Dragon Boots, which means you can make Primordials. I know it's 95 Slayer, it's a lot of grind, but that'll come by way quicker than in the main game. And then with some combos, you can definitely get Eternal Boots. And if you happen to do some clues, even though I don't recommend it if you watched the first video, you can also get Pegations, which is just a cool added bonus, right? With that said, let's look at the gear that these bosses actually give you and how you can route that to whatever that combat style is that you chose. In Asgarnia, you get access to Pest Control, which means you can get Void. But unless you also take Kandrin, you can't get Elite Void. In my opinion, I think the amount of time, even if you do combat achievements and stuff first, to get Void is just not worth it unless the points are crazy scaled and it's like an elite or master task to get Void. It's just not worth it, and I don't expect it to be that high. It'll probably be like a hard task, and I don't think the time investment is worth it for basically anybody. The gear just gets outclassed by using switches. You should have enough with gear from the drop rate multipliers that the RNG of getting good gear just shouldn't matter quite as much. And as such, I think Elite Void is something that you should not do, and you should skip it. Boots. So we talked about Serb and how you can get Pegasions and Primordials immediately. And if you get Desert, you also can get Eternal Boots. That is something that is very good to get once you have the Slayer level to do Serve, and actually grind those out is totally fine and reasonable. You should definitely do that. And then the last piece of non-God Wars Dungeon loot is Defenders. So the Warriors Guild Defender Cyclopses are all boosted. In last league, it was just the Dragon Defender. You still had to do Bronze through Rune at its normal drop rate, which is so slow, and those runes get so crowded, especially early in league. Luckily, all from Bronze all the way to Dragon have the increased drop rate multipliers. Now those rooms are still going to be busy, but people are going to be churning through them a little bit faster because you'll have that drop rate multiplier through the long portion of the Bronze through Rune. With that said, I think you should wait to do this until you have at least the tier 3 or tier 4 relic that ends up increasing your multiplier again. Assuming we get a relic that helps reduce specs, which we have had in the last 2 leagues. And so there's a valid assumption to think we're going to get another one. The only one that's really, really good is the Bandos Godsword. and maybe the Armadillo Godsword if you don't have another damaging spec weapon. The other ones all have a really niche use, and unless there's like a master task to build all 5 Godswords, it's probably not worth camping all of them, but you absolutely want a BGS regardless of your combat style. If you're the melee combat relic and you need a spec weapon, the AGS is also okay. But in general, you only want to go for the BGS. Other gear is you can get Torva. Now Torva requires you to kill 2 different God Wars dungeon bosses. Not only do you have to kill next to get the Torva drop, but you also have to repair it with Bandos items. So going to Bandos and getting full Bandos, and probably a duplicate or 2 depending on how RNG works out in your favor, to then get your Torva later on to be able to repair it immediately with the gear you already have is very, very good. And especially if you're going melee, it's so good. And even if you're not the melee and you're in God Wars dungeon, having that as like your switch weapons makes you so much more worthwhile in some raids where there's melee only phases. I'm thinking like Akka and TOA, doing the melee hand on Ulm. Like, it's so good to be able to just equip your full Torva and just blast in those phases where even though you might not be doing the most damage because somebody else might be the melee relic, you'll still be able to keep way better pace than somebody who only has like a fighter torso and like rune plate legs. You get Armadillo from Kriara, which is a full set of gear that is significantly better than your black d'hide you'll be able to get from Misthalin and Karamja. This also feeds into other raids like TOA, where if you get Missouri, you need this Armadillo. So if you do a Desert plus Asgarnia combo, getting Arma is so important, so that way you can upgrade your Missouri. You also get the Zerite crossbow and fan braces. Very similar to the BGS, the Zerite crossbow is very good, especially if there's a spec relic, regardless of what combat relic style you choose, because being able to just launch 4 Zerite crossbow specs into every boss at the beginning of every fight, just instantly deal 400 damage to anything you're fighting, is like insane. By having Asgarnia, you can actually get a Maxscape. Because you have access to the Maxscape Island, this is the only region that you can actually get a Maxscape and wear it. So if that's something you want to do, if your whole goal of League is I want the extra XP multiplier and I want to max as fast as possible, and like as long as I max by the end of the leagues I'm going to be happy, you definitely want to take Asgarnia. So let's talk about skilling in the God Wars Dungeon region. Obviously, if God Wars Dungeon is there, that means we need to do some combats, right? We need to be able to kill these bosses. We're doing a lot of PvM in this region, as that is the main focal point. Luckily, we actually have a lot of good ways of training these skills kind of simultaneously together to get you to a point where you can kill these God Wars Dungeon bosses, even if you come in as your second region, or as your first region unlock after Misthalin and Karamja. We get the Taverley Dungeon, which means you have a huge wealth of monsters that you can train on, as well as doing your Slayer there, right? Now, the other thing that's really nice about this dungeon is you have the blue dragons that you can do your range, your magic, and your prayer training from, right? You actually have a monster that drops some dragon bones, or even the baby blue dragons if you want to start out a little smaller, to really get that prayer up with that XP multiplier you have. Again, I kind of mentioned this in the last video, but once you get your construction up a bit, you can build a limestone altar with the very first starter regions you have unlocked. So you can offer those up and get even some extra bonus prayer training, which is really, really nice. On that note, let's talk about construction. So construction actually is a do in this region. Amy unlocks the ability of doing mahogany homes. If you don't pick Asgarnia, regardless of whether there's a construction person in your region, you actually can't do mahogany homes without first talking to her and starting the tutorial. Now, mahogany homes came out right before Trailblazer League 1 came out, and they actually disabled it because they didn't have time to implement the ability of only unlocking tasks in the regions that you had unlocked, but that is now a thing. So that's actually a great way of training construction that is new, that we didn't have last Trailblazer League. So if you just have Asgarnia and Misthalin and Karamja as your only regions, you will only get tasks in Varrock and Falador. If you unlock something like Korend, you'll start getting the Hosidius locations as well, and as you do it, you get more and more, which means you can actually focus construction early in your account now, if this is your first region unlock, and you only need to be able to teleport between Fali and Varrock, and every task will be there, which limits the amount of downtime you have running those really long treks from like the Hosidius house portal all the way up to the very top of Hosidius to do a task, because Falador and Varrock are both very, very close together. So doing this training and doing a lot of construction before unlocking your next region is actually really, really good and a great thing to prioritize. Rune crafting is also a do in this region. The problems we had in Misthalin, where you didn't have access to a good way of getting talismans, but you now have the wizards that are just north of Port Sarim to get your basic talismans, your air, earth, water, and fire talismans. In this region, you then have air, earth, and water now unlocked, right? As well as nature and law become available with this region. So you now have a way of actually actively training it. You still have to mine your essence. You don't have a great way of getting that besides kind of passively through Slayer, which is okay. You get an XP multiplier. It's not the end of the world. In general, you kind of want to wait until you get Last Recall to start actively training this, but throwing a couple of levels here and there just to do your diaries and a couple of the random easy tasks that'll be surrounded by rune crafting is actually a really good thing, but I wouldn't hard focus it. Now we look at agility. Agility in Varrock, or not Varrock, in Falador is actually a do. You do get the Falador course, which will have a KC task attached to it, which is a good thing to do. Depending on what your other regions are, this may actually be the best agility training you will get. It's not great, I'm gonna preface that, but it is possible that you don't get a better unlock here. If you don't have a better agility training method with your other regions, you want to definitely prioritize getting to 80 agility, which is your Serb shortcut. But you're only really going to do agility just for the tasks and that agility shortcut, so that way you can get to Serb, and also jumping over the Blue Dragon pipe will help speed up that training. Herblore, this is where Herblore starts getting really good. You now have access to Taverly, which means you can buy Eye of Newts to really start this grind. You have the Giant Mole, like we talked about earlier, which gives you tons of seeds, and you also get a farming patch, which allows you to then farm all of those seeds you get, which means farming is also really good to do here. You also get 2 extra tree spots. You get the Falador patch and the Taverly patch for all of those tree seeds. So you now just have a plethora of places and seed resources to actually go at these 2 skills together. Thieving is one of those that I'm going to mark as a don't do thieving. You don't really want to train it here. There's not very many good ways of doing it. There'll probably be a task like pickpocket a Falador Knight or Guard, or go do a Dorgashian Rich Chest. Go do the like one-off tasks, but don't camp it and don't like actively train. There's way better regions to train your thieving in. You do get the Crafting Guild in this region. The Crafting Guild, unfortunately, is kind of mediocre. You get the access to a Tanner there. You have blue dragons to like make blue dragon hide bodies, but it's pretty mediocre, and still there's better ways of crafting in other regions that I would probably hold off on crafting in this region. Likewise with fletching, there's nothing special here, and there's way better things to be doing in this region that if you didn't fletch during Misthalin and Karamja, there's no reason to be fletching here either. Hunter gives you nothing new. It is the exact same methods that you had in whatever your other regions are. You get nothing new. There's no reason to train it here. We're just gonna move on. You do get the Mining Guild as well as Motherlode Mine in this region. So mining is very good. There'll most likely be a task to get the Prospector outfit. And that is also a requirement for the Falador Hard Diary, which you absolutely want to do if you're camping Mole for 750 kills like there was a task for last time. Smithing. Smithing is okay to do here, but I'm going to mark it as a don't. You're going to get a lot of ores from mining, but your actually smith training doesn't really improve at all here from before. So I think just stockpile up on your mining from mining your motherlode mine or power mining iron in the guild. But don't actually smith that ore, just hang on to it unless there's like really specific tasks that you're trying to go for. Fishing is fine. It's no different than Kramja though. You don't really unlock anything new, so I would just call that a no. Cook as needed, but again, you're not really focusing on it. There shouldn't really be any cooking tasks. There's no really new cooking unlocks here. And same with fire making and wood cutting. You actually don't unlock anything new with either of these. Reminder to subscribe so you don't miss tomorrow's episode.